books of the Maccabees chronicle the Jewish resistance led by the Maccabee family against the Seleucid Empire, a saga marked by guerrilla warfare, zealous fighters, and a quest to reclaim the sanctity of the Jerusalem temple. But this wasn't just a local skirmish. It was a full-blown revolution that ignited the flames of nationalism and religious autonomy. Why then were these books excluded from many biblical canons? The answer lies in the inherent threat they posed. The Maccabees' successful defiance against a larger empire presented a potent example of how determined insurgents could overthrow their rulers. Such narratives were dangerous in the eyes of both religious and secular leaders, who sought to maintain order and discourage dissent within their realms. For religious authorities, the fear was twofold. First, the violent and militant nature of the Maccabees' actions could be seen as glorifying war and rebellion, which conflicted with the emerging Christian ethos of peace and submission to authority, as taught by Jesus. Second, the strong emphasis on Jewish nationalism could potentially alienate non-Jewish converts, who were pivotal to the growth of early Christianity. Political leaders, on the other hand, recognized the subversive power of the Maccabees' story. In a time when empires were maintained through the suppression of revolts and the integration of diverse cultures, endorsing a scripture that celebrated successful rebellion could inspire similar uprisings across their territories. Thus, the books of the Maccabees were deemed too politically volatile, too controversial, and too divisive. They were excluded from the canon not because they lacked spiritual or historical value, but because their inclusion could undermine the precarious balance of power, both in religious and secular spheres. The books of the Maccabees are steeped in Jewish cultural and religious identity. They detail not only the revolt against Hellenistic rulers, but also celebrate the reassertion of Jewish traditions and laws. This focus on Jewish nationalism and religious zeal, which resonates deeply with Jewish history and identity, presents complexities for a Christian theology that aims to transcend specific ethnic and cultural boundaries. As Christianity sought to establish itself as a universal religion, texts that heavily emphasized Jewish particularism, like the Maccabees, posed a challenge. The very essence of these books, which glorify a rebellion to preserve Jewish law and customs, could seem at odds with the New Testament messages of universal salvation and the breaking down of barriers between Jews and Gentiles. Moreover, the Maccabees' militant resistance and the violent overthrow of their oppressors clashed with the Christian teachings of peace, forgiveness, and turning the other cheek, as advocated by Jesus. These doctrinal discrepancies made the integration of the Maccabean texts into the Christian canon problematic, as they could potentially encourage dissent and conflict, counter to the ethos of peace and unity promoted by the early church. Additionally, the explicit celebration of Hanukkah in the books of the Maccabees, marking the rededication of the Second Temple, emphasizes a religious practice that did not align with Christian liturgical traditions. This festival, while of profound significance in Judaism, did not hold the same theological or historical relevance for Christians, further alienating the text from Christian scripture. The decision to exclude such texts from the Christian canon was also influenced by the broader goal of defining a distinct Christian identity. As the Church Fathers worked to delineate what was canonical and what was not, they opted for texts that supported the theological and pastoral aims of the growing church, sidelining those that might emphasize divisions or uphold outdated covenantal theology. The books of the Maccabees, rich in historical narrative and detailed accounts of the Jewish revolt against Hellenistic rule, have long been subjects of debate over their historical accuracy and authenticity. This controversy significantly influenced their canonical status and ultimately led to their exclusion from many versions of the Christian Bible. At the heart of the issue is the nature of the texts themselves. The books of the Maccabees provide a detailed historical account of the Jewish struggle for independence in the 2nd century BCE. However, the mixture of historical fact with miraculous events has led some scholars to question the reliability of these books as historical documents. For instance, The narrative includes supernatural occurrences and divine interventions that align with Jewish religious beliefs but stand at odds with a purely historical record. This blending of history with religious fervor has led to debates among early church fathers and scholars about where to draw the line between divine history and historical fact. The distinction between what is considered apocryphal and what is canonical often hinges on the perceived divine inspiration and theological utility of a text. While the books of the Maccabees are undeniably important for understanding Jewish history and culture, their direct contribution to Christian theological themes, such as salvation and the nature of Jesus Christ, is less clear. Moreover, the early Christian church was concerned with establishing a canon that would support and reinforce the teachings of Jesus and the apostles. Texts that were primarily historical or nationalistic in nature, without clear links to these broader theological goals, were often relegated to a secondary status. The decision to exclude Maccabees from the canon in many Christian traditions, therefore, was not just about its historical content, but also about its utility in supporting the foundational Christian narrative. In this context, Maccabees was caught in the crossfire between being an invaluable historical record and not fitting neatly into the emerging Christian doctrinal framework. The Maccabees stand as towering figures in Jewish history, celebrated as heroic liberators who fought valiantly for religious freedom and national independence. However, their reception has been markedly different across various religious traditions, particularly when viewed through the lens of Christian scripture. This divergence in perception has played a significant role in the controversy surrounding their texts. In Jewish tradition, the Maccabees are venerated as staunch defenders of the faith, whose actions led to the miraculous rededication of the temple in Jerusalem, commemorated during Hanukkah. Their revolt against Hellenistic oppression is seen as a righteous struggle for the preservation of Jewish law and identity. Conversely, the early Christian response to the Maccabees was more complex. While their fight for religious autonomy could be admired, their methods, marked by violent rebellion and militant resistance, posed a theological dilemma. Early Christians, following the teachings of Christ on peace and submission, found themselves at odds with the Maccabean approach to conflict resolution. Furthermore, the Maccabees' narrative does not clearly advance the Christian theological themes of redemption and salvation, which are central to the New Testament. Instead, their story focuses on temporal victory and political autonomy, themes that resonated less with the spiritual and universal message of Christianity. This dichotomy between being seen as heroes in one tradition and rebels in another has fueled debates about the place of the Maccabean texts in religious scripture. Their exclusion from many Christian canons can be partly attributed to this tension between admiring their zeal and questioning their methods and motives within the broader Christian ethos. The controversy extends beyond theology into the realm of political implications. Endorsing texts that celebrate open rebellion could potentially encourage similar dissent against established authorities, a risk that many religious and secular leaders were unwilling to take, especially as Christianity sought to establish itself as the state religion in various regions. The books of the Maccabees are not only historical chronicles, they are also tales filled with graphic depictions of warfare and striking accounts of miracles, elements that made them both compelling and controversial. The graphic nature of these texts and their portrayal of divine intervention have contributed to their exclusion from many Christian canons. In vivid detail, the Maccabees describe brutal battles, sieges, and guerrilla tactics used by the Jewish rebels to resist Hellenistic forces. These descriptions include not just strategic maneuvers, but also the bloody realities of war, slain soldiers, desecrated sanctuaries, and widespread suffering. Such explicit portrayal of violence was troubling to early Christian leaders, who were tasked with spreading a religion founded on the principles of peace, forgiveness, and turning the other cheek. The stark contrast between the message of Jesus and the militant actions of the Maccabees raised serious concerns about the suitability of these books for inclusion in a Christian canon. Moreover, the books of the Maccabees are replete with instances of divine intervention that serve to validate and support the Maccabean cause. Miraculous events, such as angelic appearances in battle and supernatural signs endorsing the rebels, intertwine the divine with the violent, further complicating the theological implications of these texts. These miraculous accounts were both a source of inspiration and a point of contention. While they underscored the righteousness of the Maccabean cause for Jewish audiences, for Christians, they posed a theological dilemma. The depiction of God actively supporting violent rebellion conflicted with the New Testament depiction of God as a figure of mercy and peace. The combination of graphic violence and divine endorsement of military actions made the Maccabees a complex candidate for scriptural inclusion. For many Christian leaders, promoting texts that glorified war and depicted God as a participant in violent conflicts was incompatible with the teachings and image of Christ. The books of the Maccabees are imbued with a powerful sense of nationalism, celebrating the Maccabees' success in liberating their homeland from foreign rule and re-establishing Jewish religious practices. This fervent nationalistic zeal, while galvanizing for some, was perceived as a threat by both religious and secular authorities, leading to the text's exclusion from many Christian canons.